And this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, more evidence of hacking and attempts to meddle in the U.S. midterm elections. Facebook and Twitter say they've discovered accounts linked to Russia and Iran. And the DNC warns of an attempted hack into its voter database. Plus, earnings reports from two newly public companies. Fintech firm Adyen turns in strong results, and Xiaomi proves it can dominate the smartphone market. We will discuss. And as Elon Musk faces scrutiny from the SEC, investors and the public at large, can he hold on to the CEO reins at Tesla? First to our top story, the Democratic National Committee contacted the FBI Tuesday after it detected what it believes was an unsuccessful attempt to hack into its voter database. This as Facebook and Twitter said they removed hundreds of fake accounts aimed at manipulating global politics. The twist this time, another country besides Russia has been implicated. Iran. Facebook said it shut down 652 pages, groups, and accounts that originated in Iran. It also took down an undisclosed number linked to the Russian military. Meantime, Twitter suspended 284 accounts, many, it says, are also from Iran. Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg described Facebook's finding in a call with reporters.
We believe these pages, groups, and accounts were part of two separate sets of campaigns. First, a set of activity from Iran, including from some with ties to state-owned media. And second, a set of activity that the U.S. government and others have publicly linked to Russian military intelligence services. We've been investigating some of these campaigns for months now, which highlights the tension we face in every investigation between removing bad actors quickly and improving our defenses over time.
For more, let's go to Washington, where Bloomberg Tech cybersecurity reporter Jordan Robertson is standing by. Jordan, let's first talk about this Facebook issue. What do you make of the fact that now Iran has potentially been implicated here in perhaps some broader plan to meddle in U.S. politics?
Sure, Emily. Yeah, the big takeaway here is that this is a really good sign that these organizations, Facebook and others, are taking active steps to eliminate these kinds of disinformation accounts. The fact that Iran is getting in on the disinformation game as well, possibly related to our elections, or at least the election season, is obviously not a great sign. I mean, what it shows is that we all continue to be vulnerable to disinformation on the web, especially on social media platforms such as Facebook. These organizations don't do these things because there's no value in them. So it's a reminder that going into election season here, we all need to be really vigilant about things that look suspicious online might deserve some further scrutiny.
Is there any evidence, though, that these campaigns were specifically designed to influence the U.S. midterm elections or to just sow sort of general misinformation?
It's a good question. I think it's probably hard to tell, but it's probably a little bit of both. The way I look at it is, this is still election season. So whether these are campaigns that are designed to influence a particular congressional district one way or the other, that remains to be seen. We haven't seen that from the data that's been released. But what does seem apparent is that election season is kind of high tide for these organizations, these attacker groups, to sow their disinformation campaigns, because this is when people are paying attention to politics. This is when people are, assessing their own political views and taking in political information. So in that sense, it makes perfect sense that this would be the time for those attacks.
Now, on this call with press, Mark Zuckerberg took a similar refrain: security is an arms race. Take a listen to what he had to say.
Security is not something that you ever fully solve. Our adversaries are sophisticated and well-funded, and we have to constantly keep improving to stay ahead. But the shift we've made from reactive to proactive detection is a big change, and it's going to make Facebook safer for everyone over time.
That said, Facebook discovered these pages acting on a tip from the cybersecurity firm FireEye, and we certainly know that they bungled their response to Russian meddling in the 2016 election. Does it make you wonder, Jordan, is China doing this too? Could North Korea be doing this as well? Could the U.S. be using Facebook to do similar things in other countries?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think to your first point, it obviously is a great sign that we're seeing a different Facebook now regarding this issue of fake news and disinformation than we did before 2016. I think a lot of executives kind of dismissed this idea of fake news as being something that would be kind of irrelevant. So we're seeing a very different Facebook. They are being proactive. They are promoting these efforts, and I think that's ultimately a really good thing. It reminds people these efforts are still out there. But to your point as well, there's absolutely no reason to believe that other countries are not using the platform for the exact same purposes. But from Facebook's perspective, this is a hard problem to solve, like some of the Russian examples that came out in 2016, like where they pretended to be Black Lives Matter, activist pages. Their propaganda didn't look too dissimilar from actual promotional materials for Black Lives Matter events. The intentions and the motivations were completely different, but it's very hard to distinguish sometimes between, state-sponsored propaganda and legitimate activist content. It all depends on the aims.
Now, where there may be a more direct link is this developing story that the DNC reported to the FBI an attempt to hack into its voter database, albeit unsuccessfully. Walk us through what we know and where this might have originated.
Sure. What we know is that a security company called Lookout alerted the DNC to a phishing page that was created to be essentially an identical replica of a website or login page that the DNC uses to manage its voter registration database. The DNC was alerted to this. It alerted the FBI. They blocked access to that page, and then obviously are making it public. The really significant thing about this here is, again, organizations, security organizations, and political organizations are taking this threat of phishing and fake news, much more seriously, which is a great thing. And also, it does highlight, though, that, kind of one of my pet issues is this voter registration stuff, because if you tamper with voter registration records, you can really cause a lot of chaos. You can cause people to go to the wrong places on polling days. You can cause them to be targeted with inaccurate ads, things like that. So voter registration data, while quasi-public, is very valuable to both hackers and political operatives. And in this case, all it would have taken, from my understanding, is one Democratic official, could be a local official or a state official or a federal official, to log in, to fall victim to the fake phishing page and log in, enter their password, and that would give the attackers access to the Democrats' national voter database. Now, what they could do with it is still kind of open to question, but it just shows it doesn't take a lot for some of these hackers to be successful.
Right. We often focus on whether the vote count could be changed or hacked, but the possibility of hacking into a voter database could also be incredibly disruptive. Jordan Robertson for us in Washington. Thank you so much, Jordan, and I know you'll continue to bring us updates as these stories develop. Sticking with Russian interference, Michael Cohen's lawyer is claiming his client has knowledge of Russian hacking and collusion into the U.S. 2016 presidential election, and that the president could be implicated. Lanny Davis told CNN on Wednesday that, quote, "It's my observation that Mr. Cohen has knowledge that would be of interest to the special counsel about the issue of whether Donald Trump ahead of time knew about the hacking of emails, which is a computer crime." Let's get straight to Bloomberg's chief Washington correspondent, Kevin Cirilli. And again, Kevin, this is another story that is developing by the minute. But what do we know about what Michael Cohen could now potentially share about the president's knowledge of collusion or hacking before the actual election?
Emily, I asked this directly to Lanny Davis when I interviewed him earlier, and quite frankly, he was very evasive in terms of saying what exact evidence his client, Michael Cohen, the president's former fixer and personal attorney, would be willing to provide. But he did say, Emily, that they are actually expanding their investigation potentially into the Trump organization. Take a listen to what he told me.
Yes, the Trump organization was responsible for initiating the idea of paying off Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal to keep them quiet.
So this, of course, goes beyond just the issue of the Russian hacking, but also into just who was involved with regards to the payments of these two women who have alleged extramarital affairs. The president, for his part, telling Fox News in an exclusive interview that he's stating now that the money came from his personal account and not from campaign finance violations.
So should we expect Cohen to be speaking with Mueller's team at this point?
Well, he has said that he is fully going to cooperate with whomever he is speaking with. I would note, to kind of get into the legal weeds here for a second, that the prosecution from New York, which is really in charge of this case, did not strike any type of specific deal with Michael Cohen in terms of a cooperation agreement. That said, the special counsel, and this is really interesting now, because Bob Mueller's investigation team at the special counsel could, in fact, be trying to use as a legal front line the case in New York. So the first trial, literally, so to speak, is going through New York. Now, I asked Lanny Davis about whether or not why they didn't strike a cooperative deal, and he pushed back against that notion. He said that his client, Michael Cohen, is willing to cooperate with whomever is going to be interviewing him, and that they are fully willing to cooperate with the special counsel.
Now, the president has been responding to this on Twitter. Yep. He tweeted, "If anyone is looking for a good lawyer, I would strongly suggest that you don't retain the services of Michael Cohen." Contrast that with what he's saying about Paul Manafort, who was convicted on several counts. "I feel very badly for Paul Manafort and his wonderful family. Justice, quote unquote, took a 12-year-old tax case, among other things, applied tremendous pressure on him, and unlike Michael Cohen, he refused to make up stories in order to get a deal. Such respect for a brave man." All of this said, Kevin, with these new revelations coming from Michael Cohen, or potentially coming from Michael Cohen, what could the president actually be facing here, given the DOJ guidelines that a president himself, a sitting president, cannot be indicted?
Yeah, it's a great point. And really yesterday, when the president spoke in Charleston, West Virginia, he said, "Show me the collusion," his words, direct words, because the Republicans that I speak with in the last 24 hours are adamant that there is no evidence to suggest any type of collusion between the Trump campaign as well as Russia. The second point that I would make is just how this might have a policy implication for between now and 11 weeks from now with these midterm elections. Because if you look at the polling coming out of the special elections, Emily, you'll start to see that Democrats have had a resurgence in the polls. I've had Republicans tell me that they notice that Democrats are more motivated right now in the special elections to get to the polls. That obviously gets interesting. Thirdly and finally that I would make is, should something like the House of Representatives flip back to Democrat control, House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi, a Democrat from California, raising the issue of whether or not the president has put himself in quote-unquote legal jeopardy. Her words. So this really does set up, obviously, a severe political domino effect of what exactly it would mean on a host of different regulatory fronts should Democrats take back control of one or both chambers.
Now, there's still some mystery around other payments that flowed through this shell company that Michael Cohen created, including payments tied to a Russian oligarch who potentially has ties to President Putin. Kevin, would you say that what we've learned in the last 24 hours could be the biggest break in the special investigation?
I got to be candid here. I ran into Michael Cohen at the Trump Hotel earlier this year, and I asked him, how are you doing? And he said, quote unquote, he's trying to stay out of jail. And now he faces 43 months minimum of jail time for pleading guilty to this. And the New York courts did not strike a deal with him. I think we have to take a step back to your point and really kind of look at this for a second. President Trump's previous fixer and longtime personal attorney has pleaded guilty, and Paul Manafort, the president's ex-campaign chairman, was found guilty by a jury of his peers. It was a remarkable day as some of the president's closest men were found guilty and pleaded guilty to significant charges.
All right. Sobering analysis there from our Kevin Cirilli in Washington. Thank you, Kevin, so much for your reporting.
Emily. Anytime.
All right, coming up, stocks are on a historic bull run and funding rounds for startups are hitting record levels. Is there too much money moving around in the market, and could it soon dry up? We will discuss. And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio, listen on the Bloomberg app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on SiriusXM. This is Bloomberg. Deal momentum is not slowing down. Just this week, Slack closed a $427 million round of funding, pushing the firm's valuation to $7.1 billion. To gauge investor sentiment, I want to bring in Michal Katz, co-head of tech investment banking at RBC Capital Markets, to talk about the broader landscape. So, Michal, it seems like there's so much money flooding into Silicon Valley, in particular, from all sources, whether it's SoftBank or, private equity. Do you expect this spout essentially to continue?
There have been record fundraising activity. You talked about the private equity, the traditional private equity. Last year was a record year. This year is kind of on its way to be another $300 billion of capital being raised. But you're right, it's not just private equity. It's sovereign wealth funds. It's alternative. Also, I was going to say corporates have their own venture funds. So you're talking about the venture capital community, the PE community, sovereign wealth funds, corporates, and family offices. So you're asking about will this continue in terms of fundraising? I think there's a lot of dry powder being capital raised as well as assets in portfolio of private equity firms that is out there and available to be put to work. So people are looking for returns, and I don't see an end in sight.
So you don't see a time when the powder will dry up?
It's not a matter of the powder being dried out. I think there's a lot of capital sitting on the sidelines. But if you're a disciplined investor, the big question for me is, where do you put the money to work? Do the valuations justify making the investment at this time? And to me, that is the bigger question. One data point from PitchBook that came out, that there has been a drop in capital calls. So folks have been raising money, yet capital calls, meaning actually asking investments to fund their commitment, have been dropping, and distributions have been exceeding capital calls.
So what does that mean? That
means a lot of money on the sidelines, and folks are looking to put it to work.
So I want to talk a little bit about Tesla here, because, it's super controversial. There's a sovereign wealth fund potentially involved here, private equity potentially involved here. Elon Musk wants to take his company private, and most people that we've talked to think it's not actually going to happen. In fact, there's a zero chance. How does that play into the current dynamics that we're seeing? Is there enough money to even fund a buyout of that size?
The answer is, over the last couple of years, we've seen LBOs that are of sizes that I would say record levels. We've seen Michael Dell's Dell LBO. We've seen the buyout of EMC. We've just seen the Thomson Reuters, the financial and risk division out of Thomson Reuters being acquired at $20 billion. Capital is there. If Elon owning 20% or so of the company, if you have employees or other investors that are willing to roll over, that kind of hole, if you will, that needs to be plugged in terms of funding, can be put out there. But I think that there are so many more questions beyond capital. I will tell you that capital is a question; it's not the question.
So, what are the odds you'd give of such a deal happening?
Given can't comment on that, just being that I'm in tech banking and other involvements of the firm, I just think that there are a lot of obstacles out there. It'll be some, I wouldn't put it, as a former lawyer, I would never say never, but I think the odds today, I would put them as rather low.
What are the pros and cons of giving another entity like the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund, as an example, that kind of control? I mean, we've seen this fund take a 5% stake in the company.
Right.
We've also seen, news leak about some of their other investments, and because of their large stake in Tesla, they're now completely vulnerable to any news that comes out about the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund's other prospects.
And again, I don't have inside information as to what their current state is. There have also been news out there that they're looking for funding of their actual public investment fund. Like, they've put money in Uber as well. That was one of the leaks that you've alluded to. You say, what are the benefits? I really think that you're looking at an economy that's looking to move from a petrostate into a more technology-focused economy. It's a big country, and it's an opportunity, perhaps, to try to leverage some of their core competencies. So I'm not thinking about it more from the CFIUS or other type of regulatory, but I do think that there are benefits to going outside your traditional pools of capital, whether it be through corporates or, Saudis' access to their region of the world. There could be benefits having them be part of an investment.
What about on the public market side? We've seen stocks in general on a historical run. Will that continue?
Oh, that's like the $1 million question.
Or $1 trillion question.
Absolutely. Look, from It really does depend. I mean, in terms of the overall valuations, one may argue that we are at a point where valuations are kind of we're fully valued. But it's been incredibly, I would say, receptive market for new IPOs. IPOs have been one of the best performing asset class. We're seeing a slew of M&A activity. Large deals are back in vogue. As you recall, last year really saw like a dearth of like large transactions. And that was one of my big concerns is as valuations continue to run up, at some point, again, you're being a disciplined investor, a disciplined acquirer, will you continue to want to play in this market? As long as the fund, you asked the question, will it continue? Mm-hmm. From where we're sitting today, the economy is on a sound footing. Corporate earnings have been doing well. The VIX is still at 12 times. It seems like this bull run has some more leg to it.
Right. All right. Michal Katz, co-head of tech investment banking at RBC Capital Markets. Thank you, as always.
Thank you for having me.
Coming up, fintech darling Adyen excites investors with its first earnings report after the IPO. We'll discuss next. This is Bloomberg. Dutch payment processor Adyen made a big splash when it launched its IPO this past June, and it's keeping up with investor expectations after posting a strong first earnings report. The company, which processes payments for Uber, Netflix, and Spotify, saw a 67% increase in revenue in the quarter. Here with more, Bloomberg's Natalia Drozdiak joining us from Brussels. Natalia, first of all, walk us through these earnings and why they were so strong.
Well, so one of the big factors would just be the global e-commerce boom, which is really boosting fintech firms worldwide. But in this particular case, Adyen pointed also to changes in shopping behavior, but also mobile payments. They also made some, they pointed to some important deals that they had with Valve, Dunkin' Donuts, and eBay. But the bulk of the driving factor was their existing merchants. Those will start factoring in the near future.
So who are Adyen's competitors, and what does Adyen have on them?
So Adyen says that it considers some of the big kind of online payment providers that operate internationally to be its biggest competitors. So that would be companies like WorldPay, Ingenico, and Chase Merchant. And to some extent, they also compete with companies like Alibaba and Amazon, which offer their own payment solutions. But Adyen says it differs itself from the pack because it can overall, it can make it easier and cheaper for merchants to process online payments. But they do that by streamlining the payment chain, so everything from checkout to the payment settlement is streamlined in one-stop solution for merchants. They also provide data analysis tools, and crucially, they can handle transfers in more currencies and payment types than their competitors can. So as a result, that's helped businesses spread around the world.
All right. They're also reporting they see a lot of opportunities in hospitality, restaurants. They've got a new deal with eBay. Bloomberg's Natalia Drozdiak in Brussels for us. Thank you so much for sharing that report. Coming up, Elon Musk has defended his relentless work ethic. However, it seems that Tesla could move on without its CEO constantly on the factory floor. We'll give you some evidence next. This is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. During Elon Musk's emotional interview with the New York Times, he defended his work ethic and made mention of his quick trip to Spain for his brother's wedding. The trip was described as a quick dash in and out. Musk even expressed having barely enough time to savor the moment, saying he arrived 2 hours before the ceremony and returned to Tesla's factory immediately after. However, Bloomberg News pieced together the details of his trip from Musk's own tweets and flight data. In fact, he attended his brother's wedding in Spain, then took his kids to Belfast so they could see the set of Game of Thrones. In fact, for 5 days this summer, Tesla actually survived without Elon Musk on the factory floor. So, Should Musk's relentless work ethic be defended? For more, I want to bring in Bloomberg Businessweek's Ashley Vance, who knows a thing or two about the Tesla CEO and, of course, wrote the bio on Elon Musk. So you saw all sides of Elon Musk. Now, today, the public is seeing, not just visionary Musk, but crying to the New York Times Musk, tweet happy Musk, cutting off analysts on an earnings call Musk, Ambien Musk. Is this new?
In some ways it's new, in some ways it's not. If you go back in Elon's history and Tesla's history, in 2008 was really a crisis that was sort of like we're at with Tesla now, where the future of the company was uncertain. It was going towards bankruptcy, and Elon was under arguably as much pressure as he was now. And back then he would do similar things. He would give his employees a really hard time. He went after the press that was really bagging on Tesla, but I think he was not as famous back then. The companies were not as successful, and so there was not as much attention on all of this. This time around, you've got Elon on Twitter, and so this is the first time the public has seen all sides of Elon that only his employees and his family used to see before. You've got Tesla being this huge success now, so there's a lot more pressure on him, and so I think it's kind of this public crucible that's very strange to witness.
There's also this level of untruthfulness that he seems to be walking right into, not only tweeting something that could have been untruthful, that funding was secured when in fact it appears that it was not, saying that he dashed in and out of his brother's wedding when his own tweets show that he didn't do just that. I mean, how concerning is that?
It's pretty strange. So, in my experience with Elon, I think he's always been a fundamentally truthful guy. Although there have been those moments where he definitely chooses his words carefully, and you could interpret them different ways. This time is definitely different. I mean, he's getting caught in sort of making things up. There was another interview on CBS where he talked about, I would never go on vacation while my workers are suffering like this, but on Instagram he had these posts where he took his kids to Petra and Jordan and Israel, and so it's another sort of strange thing where it's hard to match up.
Well, and look, I'm glad he's taking his kids on vacation. He should be able to take a vacation. He should be able to sleep.
Absolutely. You don't want to criticize this guy. Definitely works harder than just about anyone, and people are entitled to vacations. It's like, why is he? All of this stuff is sort of shooting himself in the foot. It's like, why would you say this to the New York Times when you know it's relatively easy to stitch things together? And so this is kind of the difference, I think. He's been under this pressure before, but this time around it seems to either be too much or there's just too much going on in his life, and it seems to be kind of like overwhelming him on some level.
Now, at the same time that he was supposedly doing this quick dash in and out and actually wasn't on the factory floor, Tesla, I have a chart in my GTV library, hit that 5,000 Model 3s a week milestone. And so there's this question, how much does Tesla really need him to be there 24 plus hours a day?
Yeah. It's funny for me, having done the book on him and spent all this time with these employees, it's very hard for me to separate Tesla from Elon and to sort of imagine these two companies apart. It's also hard to imagine them keeping up this pace and hitting these milestones without him being this figure. Even though he's away for 5 days, the aura of Elon continues to go through the company. I'm sure he was checking his emails and letting people have it, even from far away. And so I don't know if he has to. I think he takes a lot on where he feels this personal responsibility to make this company succeed, and it's this cross he has to bear. I don't know if he has to be there quite as much as he thinks he does, but I also don't think the company would push itself as hard without him.
Now, he talked about trying to hire a number two, including Sheryl Sandberg, and you and I actually talked about this a couple of years ago. He looked a few times for a number two. He's never been able to find one. Does he really want a number two, and why hasn't that happened?
I don't think so. This has been going on for a long time, even before Sheryl and people like Tony Bates, who was the CEO of Skype. I know he had a meeting with Elon, but way before that, Tony Fadell was brought in at one point to possibly be what he thought was the CEO of Tesla, and Elon envisioned as much more like a COO type role, and so you had this disconnect on who's doing what, and so that fell through. But that was 6, 7, 8 years ago, and so this has been going on forever. either, so you get the feeling that Elon is setting the bar incredibly high and has some sort of hang-up about being able to turn over this control, which is funny too, because if you look at Gwynne Shotwell, who's the president of SpaceX, she's been doing that for many years, and it's worked great. SpaceX, which should be the harder company, is the more consistent, reliable company of the two.
Which also potentially goes to show the value of a number two if he was able to find one. I mean, at the end of the New York Times interview, he's talked about, well, if you can find another COO who can do the job better than me, they can have the job. He doesn't mean that, does he? I
don't think he really means it. I think he probably does mean it, but he would never believe somebody could do it as good or better than him. And so it's the same thing. He's gone through a lot of PR people in the past, and he's brought in the top people from all over the industry, people who had worked in the car industry, people who had done other sort of high-flying jobs, and then ultimately Elon ends up doing the PR himself, and he has this thing where he wants to take it all on.
Let's talk a little bit about his relationship with the board, because there are a number of directors on this board who are also on SpaceX's board, or are also investors in SpaceX, people who he has personal friendships with. Does this board actually have any control over Elon Musk, and will they call him on his mistakes, of which in the past couple of weeks it seems there have been a few, or does he just get to run free here?
I think he probably gets to run a lot more free than most CEOs, but it's only recently that the board has taken on some people that you would consider more independent. Certainly, the people that were there were the ones who, the biggest chunk of the board are people that have been with Elon since Tesla was gonna go bankrupt, was gonna get blown off the face of the earth, and so I think they put a lot more faith in him than probably a lot of board members would, because they've seen that this company would not exist without Elon, and so they think they give him an extraordinary amount of leeway. I think at this point, you've got to say, get off Twitter, just stay out of the press for a while, stop doing these self-inflicted wounds. You've got so much on your plate, just like let this other stuff go.
Now, a huge part of your reporting was driven by current and former Tesla employees. What do you imagine they think of all of this controversy, along with the idea that their company could be going private, or at least he wants it to, which means they would lose their liquidity? I
think the feeling that I get from a lot of former Tesla employees is a feeling of shock. They've certainly seen hard-charging Elon, difficult Elon, flamboyant Elon, all of that stuff before, but I think they feel there's a different tenor to what's going on now, and it would be, I think for them and in the bigger picture overall, it would be, he's put himself in a real difficult situation now after saying he was going to take the company private and setting all these wheels in motion. And if this doesn't work out, if Tesla can't hit these manufacturing targets, I mean, the company is in a fair amount of peril, and it would be sad to see it sort of crumble at this point.
Right. So if it doesn't work out, which most people have told us they think there's zero chance, what then happens to Elon Musk? Is he still the right person to run this company?
I'm sure there's a lot of people who would argue no. I mean, to me, it's just hard. I think the company could definitely benefit with somebody who, the biggest problem Tesla has always faced is this manufacturing problem. Mm-hmm. And if you look at something like Apple, you had someone like Tim Cook. Steve Jobs was the visionary. Tim Cook was this boring supply chain guy who made sure all the factories were humming along. Apple was doing good deals. Tesla clearly needs someone of that caliber to come in and fix the machinery of the company, and Elon could still do his Elon thing. It's impossible for me to imagine Tesla without him, and for it to have anywhere near the same value or cachet or brand.
Well, in fact, we had an analyst on the show yesterday who suggested that Tim Cook go work for Elon Musk, which is also impossible for me to imagine.
They should have Apple should just buy them, and then we can.
Well, that's also been suggested. Who knows if the stock keeps going down? Okay, Ashley Vance, who wrote the book on Elon Musk, thank you so much. Really great to have your perspective.
Thank you.
On this evolving story.
Appreciate it.
Coming up, it's been a little over a month since Xiaomi went public, and its first results are promising for the smartphone maker, what it means for Xiaomi and Apple ahead. And later, Snap CEO Evan Spiegel is embarking on a self-improvement quest. How will this change his style of leadership there? We'll discuss. This is Bloomberg. Apple and Google face a brewing revolt over the App Store tax. A number of companies say the tech giants are charging too much to connect consumers to developers' products. Netflix is just one of the companies that's trying to bypass the app stores. If the movement picks up, it could put a dent in Apple's and Google's profits. Well, in July, Xiaomi's highly anticipated IPO turned out to be anticlimactic, raising only $5.4 billion when it aimed for twice that. But on Wednesday, its first earnings report since going public appeared to be anything but. The Chinese smartphone giant posted a $2.1 billion profit compared to a $1.75 billion loss a year earlier. Revenue jumped up 68% to $6.6 billion. Just how did Xiaomi orchestrate a turnaround of this magnitude? To answer that, let's go to LA, where Bloomberg Tech's Mark Gurman is standing by. So, Mark, how did they do this?
Hi, Emily. Yeah, it comes all the way down to smartphones, right? There's been all this talk about the smartphone business dying or going away, and that might be because of the higher prices that we're seeing from Apple and Samsung in recent years. But Xiaomi has sort of taken another approach. They've said, I think we could sell a ton of phones if we price them to what they cost to build. That means we're not really passing on many costs to consumers. We're going to look at this as a services business where we sell things at cost, maybe take some losses along the way, but long term set ourselves up for success.
So what does this mean for Apple? Of course, this is a company with a very different strategy. You know, Xiaomi is beating them in places like India, for example, as you've reported. But does a stronger Xiaomi mean a threat to Apple?
Right now in the U.S., there's really not much of a threat. I mean, I still think Apple's biggest threat in the U.S. is Samsung, perhaps Google if they get their act together on their phones longer term. But internationally, Xiaomi is a real player. If you look at the statistics and the market share metrics in China and India and Japan and Korea and basically anywhere outside of the United States, Samsung and Apple have some serious competition from the likes of Xiaomi, Oppo, and Huawei, and it is a clear threat to Apple. I think it's a bigger threat than most people thought it would be just a couple of years ago.
So, you know, what else does Xiaomi have to prove here? I mean, there's a reason that the IPO was lackluster. There are still questions about whether they can turn themselves into this services company that they have promised to become.
Right. I mean, the big question is still the runway of the smartphones. They seem to have figured out their own niche in the smartphone market where the high end is so dominated by Samsung, Apple, and Google. So it's to be seen how long that lasts. They're eventually going to have to pivot that into a services business if they get enough phones out into the marketplace. And another thing to take a look at is if you look deep at the numbers, sure, they reported a profit, but in reality, it's about a $1 billion operating loss. And the reason it came out as a profit is because of how they adjusted some of their existing stock holdings. And we have a story on the terminal that explains that. But overall, much better than what would have been expected while looking at the original IPO situation from a few weeks ago.
So put this into context of the phones we're expecting Apple to unveil later this year, what Samsung has already unveiled. How do you expect the next year in smartphone sales to play out?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think Xiaomi is not going to do much innovative on the high end, but I think they're going to continue to dominate India, parts of developing regions in Europe and China and elsewhere on the Eastern Hemisphere. But I think Apple is going to have a really compelling offering with their 3 new phones this fall. They have their own cheaper iPhone model that's going to start around $700. Still, that's going to be about $500 more than some of these mid-tier Xiaomi phones. So they're playing in 2 totally different playing fields. One that's primarily focused on the high end and one that's on the low end.
All right. Bloomberg Tech's Mark Gurman, thank you so much for joining us today from LA. Sticking with Chinese tech giants, Alibaba reports its first quarter financials Thursday. Bloomberg's chief North Asia correspondent Stephen Engel filed this report from Hong Kong on what to expect.
Sales growth and margin pressures in focus ahead of Alibaba's first quarter results. Bloomberg Intelligence says Jack Ma's Chinese e-commerce giant probably sustained its revenue growth acceleration in the latest quarter. The consensus calls for an increase of some 60%. But that's only part of the story. Alibaba, of course, is investing heavily into new services, including its offline new retail initiatives to capture those offline consumers. Inventory costs. They've surged with its retail businesses like in-time department stores and also Hema supermarkets, and that will likely pressure gross margins, which are already at the lowest since its IPO. Keep in mind as well the consolidation of its logistics business, Cainiao, along with its heavy investment into its Southeast Asian unit, Lazada, could add even more margin pressure. Now, Bloomberg Intelligence forecasts EBITDA margins may have plunged more than 10 percentage points from a year ago, at a time as well of intense competition in the food delivery business that may force Alibaba to step up marketing costs on a couple of its platforms. We'll also be listening for any clues on a potential IPO down the line for payments giant Ant Financial, which this week, according to various media reports, denied setting a timetable for a public listing. Oh, and one more thing, that brewing trade war with the United States, we're going to hopefully hear the impact it is having on e-commerce and what Alibaba has to say. Lots to digest with Alibaba's quarterly earnings. Stephen Engel, Bloomberg News, Hong Kong.
Coming up, snapping back, or trying to, how the social media company behind Snapchat is hoping to regain success. This is Bloomberg. After a disastrous redesign, declining daily usage, and an inability to turn a profit, Snap is trying to rebound as the company's CEO is looking to improve as an executive. Much of the blame for Snapchat's troubles has fallen on Evan Spiegel himself. For 4 of the 6 quarters since its March 2017 IPO, Snap has posted revenue numbers that missed estimates. In that time, Spiegel has also lost or replaced his heads of engineering, finance, hardware, legal, product, and sales. Bloomberg Tech Sarah Fryer spent some time with the Snap CEO for her newest piece in Bloomberg Business Week. She joins us now. And Sarah, you've spoken to Evan many times over the years. Does he seem improved?
He seems committed to trying to fix what he feels is like this misunderstanding in the public about who he is. He's read the critiques of his management style, including those in Bloomberg that say, you know, he has this very dictatorial way of managing, that he's a secret keeper, that he doesn't get everyone on the same page, that he hates criticism. And his response to that is, well, I understand why you'd think that because you don't know me. So this is his attempt to say, like, listen, like, I'm a shy guy. I don't really talk about what I like or what I do, and I'm trying to get better at that. He hired a management coach. He's trying to do all-hands meetings with his employees. These are the basics of running a company that has about 3,000 employees now, just starting to really think about that in terms of Snap.
To that point, it's not just about the perception of him from the outside, but the perception of him from his own employees. He told you, I had a pretty serious Christian upbringing. I remember growing up, I was taught to be small, be a turtle. I remember thinking, why would I go around the company and just chat with people? Like, that would be so awkward. Now I go walk around the office and get a ton of emails like, oh my God, that was awesome you came by. Do you get a sense that the mood or the culture of the company itself is changing?
Well, the biggest thing that's changed in the culture may not be something that Evan did himself, but really just the geographical, physical space that Snap employees are working in. They used to be in dozens of scattered buildings in the beach town Venice, where there was a lot of tension with neighbors. People barely saw each other, weren't really allowed to visit each other in offices they didn't have access to. And now they're in this nice business park in Santa Monica with the same kind of free food and drink that you'd get in Silicon Valley. It seems much more corporate. They have those monthly all-hands meetings that you would get at another company. So in those ways, it is getting a little better, but I talked to some former employees today who read my story and said, this is not going to change. Like, Evan is who he is.
You also write in your story, you make a very good point that with Facebook and Twitter battling fake news and misinformation, online harassment, this could have been Snap's moment to shine, but they haven't been able to take advantage of it. Why not?
Well, Evan thinks that it's really at the core of it is that Snap hasn't communicated to the public how different they are from these other players, namely Facebook. Isn't the
product itself supposed to do that for them?
Yes, but this product is hard to use. They don't really advertise it. It's very it's one of those things that its coolness comes from trying to figure it out and understanding where to swipe and how to really learn to communicate with it. That's why it's so popular with young people, but their parents are just befuddled. And so they have added Polly Thorpe of Glossier to their board. That's one of the people they think is really going to help them tell this brand story. Spiegel has been talking with his mentors on the board and a management coach, Stephen Miles, who's coached other managers through tough times. And he says that he's committed to trying to make that point clearer to the public. But so far, it hasn't really quite worked.
I guess I wonder with Snap users hitting a plateau, similar to what we've seen at Twitter, if there's really, can they reaccelerate growth?
I mean, this is the same thing we saw with Twitter, right? People thought that Twitter was going to be the next Facebook, and then now they've sort of become okay with Twitter being a more niche product than Facebook. And Snap is trying to prove that there's a hunger for a kind of communication that's not permanent. But of course, Facebook has capitalized on that popularity and built Snap's functionality into its own products, which makes people even less likely to download the Snap app if they think they're getting the same thing from an Instagram. And the ads on Snap, it's one of those problems where they have to put them in the media portion of the app, and their users are using it for communicating with friends. They have to make sure that the users also want to go and see the stories from publishers. So it's going to be a very complicated road, which is going to depend, in Evan Spiegel's opinion, on employee performance.
We'll leave you with this chart in my GTV library showing the plateau in Snap users, which to be fair, we've also seen in Facebook users, as well as Twitter users. And there's this question of, have we hit a social media peak in general, or everywhere but Instagram?
Well, one thing to note about these Snapchat numbers, though, is this company is still smaller and it's declining in daily usage. That's not what you want to see when Facebook is still growing.
Right. Okay. Sarah Fryer, great piece in this week's edition of Bloomberg Business Week. Thank you so much for stopping by. And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. From San Francisco, I'm Emily Chang. This is Bloomberg.